The mummy was uncovered in the Andean mountains of South America. They had discovered the highest tomb on Earth.
It was as if we were afraid at some level that we might wake this mummy up because she seemed just so alive. But nothing had the impact of when we uncovered her hands, because those hands were perfect. We realized that this has got to be, if not the best preserved mummy in the world. We don't know of any other better.
It starts with a dead body. The mummified remains of a man known as Sylvester. Professors Jerry Conlogue and Ron Beckett have spent the last 30 years examining hundreds of mummies from around the world. This is their specialty.
This guy is in amazing condition. You know, it almost looks like a wood carving.
Unbelievable.
I've never seen a mummy this well preserved, that's for sure.
I think the most remarkable feature is his face.
He's recognizable almost, if we had a picture.
It's recognizable. He's got eyebrows. Look, you can see the pupils of his eyes.
In his ears.
You can see where they've just dried, but the shape is perfect. And the teeth, it looks like there's a central incisor missing. And I can't help but to admire his mustache.
I like it. I like it too.
He's got a great mustache. His hands are also remarkable. The fingernails almost look manicured. I mean, they're just so perfect. And it almost looks like he was holding something.
An autopsy would destroy the mummy. But using state-of-the-art technology, forensic pathologist Dr. Richard Shepard can see inside.
As a pathologist, of course, I want to see what's happening inside the body, what's happening to the internal organs. And with this technology, I'm able to do that. We can see the skin on the outside, but I can actually also cut down through the tissues and look internally at the body. We can look at the internal organs and see exactly how they lie and how they are within the body. I mean, the preservation of this mummy is quite incredible.
So who was he? And how did he end up a mummy? Since 1955, Sylvester has been on display here at the Old Curiosity Shop in Seattle.
My father was the one that got him. He's absolutely the coolest thing we have. He's been very good for business.
He's really famous. We're not, but he is. The Wild West was pretty wild, so he was a pretty tough guy.
Sylvester is just a nickname. No records survive to tell us who he really was, but there's a legend that dates from the final days of the Old West, chronicled in newspapers and passed down to the tourists.
Now this is the story of the Old West, and it's a story of a man named Sylvester. And he was a dangerous gunslinger. In a little town way out in the southwestern deserts, they were in this bar playing cards. And somebody was cheating. We don't know who it was, but one called the other a cheater. And next thing you know, they go for their guns. The guns are jerked. White gun smoke filled the room. And Sylvester got hit, took a bullet. He picked himself up off the floor, and there was so much smoke in that room that they couldn't see. They tried to shoot at him again, but he got away. He slipped out into the desert.
Is the legend of Sylvester, outlaw and gunslinger, based on fact or fiction?
Don't shoot me, I don't want to fight.
Although sometimes embellished, tales of famous shootouts, like the one at the OK Corral, are based on historical events.
Was there violence in the Old West? Were there gunslingers in the Old West? Absolutely there were. We know historically who some of them were. Did those people have gun battles? Did they shoot one another? No doubt at all.
And notorious gunslingers like Doc Holliday really did exist. But can the same be said of Sylvester?
The Egyptian technique of mummification aimed to preserve the entire body, hair, skin, teeth, and bones for eternity. And recently, science has opened a door to the time of the pharaohs. Professor Zink has extracted and analyzed DNA from the most famous mummy of all, Tutankhamun. For the first time, the DNA gives us a chance to find out for certain who Tut's mother and father were.
Getting DNA out of ancient Egyptian mummies is almost impossible. In the beginning, it was a mess, but when we managed to get this away, to clean out the samples, we got really pure DNA to manage to tell something about him, and especially about his ancestry.
To untangle King Tut's family tree, Professor Zink analyzed DNA from 10 royal mummies suspected of being related to him. One was his predecessor, Akhenaten. Of course, sons often succeeded their fathers, but it wasn't always the case.
There was one idea that maybe the skeleton of Akhenaten was the father, but nobody had the proof for this. And the only way to find this out was to analyze the DNA. We got from both mummies good results, and we could compare them. As you can see here, we put them also here. You get this peak here, and this is for King Tut. Yeah. And you get the same peak here for Akhenaten. Okay. We compared the genetic fingerprint of King Tut and Kiwi 55. And in every one of these, we have the same marker in King Tut and Kiwi 55. And these results clearly showed that they are father and son.
Albert proved beyond doubt who Tut's father was. In a 21st century museum and a 3,500-year-old tomb, Egyptologists are piecing together the supernatural story of Tutankhamun's life after death. Of a pharaoh on a mission through the underworld, fighting against the forces of darkness to save the sun and the earth from annihilation. With the highest possible stakes, the people who packed Tutankhamun's tomb did everything in their power to ensure he was prepared for the mission ahead.
The ancient Egyptians were very big on insurance, so they had lots of safety nets in case one thing didn't work, one spell didn't work, there was a backup spell. If this got destroyed, there was another backup object. So you always had things that would help you get to where you wanted to.
Egyptologists now believe this is why Tutankhamun took 5,000 objects to the afterlife. The more he took, the more chance he had of defeating the demons and overcoming the obstacles that lay ahead. But one shocking find has always perplexed archaeologists: the mummified bodies of 2 baby girls. Today, their fragile remains are being conserved at the Grand Egyptian Museum. DNA analysis reveals these 2 tiny girls were most likely Tutankhamun's daughters. But tragically, both had been stillborn. One girl at around 4 months, and the other at nearly full term.
There was such a high mortality rate for infants and sort of stillborn children in the ancient world that it's not surprising. But it is extraordinary to have them carefully mummified, wrapped up, cocooned, put in these coffins and placed in their father's tomb.
These tiny mummies are an incredibly rare discovery. But Egyptologist Joyce Tilsley believes there is an explanation for their burial alongside the pharaoh. She suspects they were the ultimate insurance policy.
Tutankhamun was very wealthy. He could have dug a grave for his daughters anytime he wanted to. So the fact that their bodies have been saved to be buried with him suggests that perhaps it's not just a practical reason, but there's a ritual reason for them being there as well.
In ancient Egyptian art, women and girls were often cast as protectors, standing alongside their fathers or the gods. And for Joyce, They were more than simply good luck charms. They were active participants in Tutankhamun's journey through the underworld.
By being either physically in the boat with Tutankhamun or just having their spirits supporting him while he's in the boat, Tutankhamun will be protected by these two daughters who he has in the tomb with him.
A cloud of death envelops Herculaneum, killing more than 300, including the soldier. Like the other victims, his skeleton shows evidence of exposure to extreme heat.
So there's significant signs of burning on this body. You can see the dark charring that's on the back of the left shoulder, the back of the head, and coming down to the arm. And these areas are really quite significant, showing there's been extensive exposure to heat of these areas.
But what explains the position of his hand?
So when you look at the left hand, it's not flat on the ground. This left hand is curled in as though he's desperately trying to crawl his way as a last gasp effort to get away from whatever is happening, the thing that finally killed him.
It looks like he's crawling away. But Pier Paolo Petrone has seen it before and has a scientific explanation.
The contracted end is found everywhere, something like this, with everyone, with every individual. And that's just contraction induced by the heat, by the high temperature. So all people has hands and feet completely contracted.
But the soldier's death differs in one important respect. Unlike most of the others who were trying to seek shelter, the soldier stood his ground in the middle of the beach. The question is, why?
It's quite possible that he was on his own because he was ordering people, instructing people to seek cover. I think he was managing the evacuation process. He was looking after all these people, and he was trying to do his best to save as many people as he could. Now, when he heard the cloud, the rumbling of the cloud coming, he was barking orders, getting people to race in to the vaults to try and save their lives.
A soldier is standing here. He doesn't move. It's easy to imagine him standing here, yelling at everybody to get themselves into the boat vaults. Make yourself safe. Get in there, protect yourself. But he doesn't move. He stands here, and he's found right there.
So what would have happened in that last final split second? The heat would have caused his skin to dissolve. Underneath his skin, the muscles would have then been affected by the heat. They would have been drawn out. The fat that was in the body would have begun to burn, and that would have helped burn the muscles away. And then eventually, we're just left with the skeleton that we see lying face down on the ground.
"2,000 years later, archaeologists will find him on the beach of Herculaneum. He died dressed in his full military kit, with a pocket full of coins. Given the chance to escape, he chose to stay, waiting on the beach with the 300 until the very end.
I think the guy on the beach, I think he was generally a good guy. I'd like to think he was a good guy.
You can see him, warts and all. This was a human being there. This wasn't an ideal hero. Extraordinary times create extraordinary people. And while this man may have been a bit of a down and out in his private life, and it's easy to imagine what he did in his spare time, at the time of Vesuvius, it looks as though he was the man trying to protect the survivors of Herculaneum. I think he was a good man at the end.
When the discovery of the Nefertiti bust was announced to the world, it revived the memory of a queen, all but forgotten for 3,000 years. To understand who she really was and why the bust was made, we first need to understand the role that Nefertiti played in the turbulent reign of her husband, the pharaoh Akhenaten.
When Akhenaten came to power, he started making some fairly radical changes. Egyptian religion had always been strongly polytheistic, so many different gods were worshipped.
Akhenaten decided to deny the existence of those gods. His people would worship just one god, through him. That would be the light of the sun. He called it the Aten.
Akhenaten seems to have had a moment of truth, of seeing that all of these other forms of divinity that people so liked really had no substance. There's nothing you can see except what is man-made. The only form of power that you can't really understand is the sun, and it's there, you can see it, and that's all that matters.
So though he's a king, Akhenaten is a revolutionary. His changes send a shockwave through Egypt.
To the ancient Egyptians, simply to say that there was one god and none of the others existed would have profoundly affected the understanding that Egyptians had of their whole environment and their whole cosmos.
And when all this happened, Nefertiti played a central part. This is a tomb carved into one of the cliffs outside Amarna.
This is a beautiful image here of Akhenaten and Nefertiti in a chariot being pulled by a galloping horse. They're both under the race of the Aten, and they're the only ones who are receiving the Aten's blessings. Traditional Egyptian religion had functioned by pairing a male god with a female goddess, who in turn create an offspring. And that engendering ensures the recreation of the world every day.
Now, with those gods abolished, Akhenaten and Nefertiti took their roles for themselves. They would be the only link between the life-giving sun god and the world of the living.
So he was the male god of creation, and she is the female goddess of creation. And by coming together, as this image represents, enforce the recreation of the universe. So in many ways, she's a type of a sex goddess to this religion.
September 19th, 1991. High on the icy ridges of the South Tyrol Mountains in northern Italy. Hikers Erica and Helmut Simon decided to take a shortcut down from the peak. As they passed a rocky gully, they made a grisly discovery. Jutting from the ice, the head and bare shoulders of a human corpse. His left arm twisted under his body. Leathery skin still covering his bones. The mummy was found here, close to the Austrian and Italian border. Analysis revealed that when he died, he was in his mid-40s. But how long had this Iceman been lying on the mountain? The carbon dating unlocked the shocking truth.
The result was 5,300 years. So this mummy is more than 5,000 years old.
Piecing together the details of this Iceman's life is going to be a challenge. He walked the earth nearly 1,000 years before the Great Pyramids were built. The last populations of woolly mammoths still roamed in Siberia. and the invention of the wheel was still a century away. He's one of the oldest preserved corpses on the planet, frozen in time, locked in ice for thousands of years. The Iceman was given a name, OTZI, after the OTZI mountain range where his remains were found. He lived in a period known as the Neolithic, a time of great change. Farming settlements were just taking hold. For OTZI, hunting was probably still a major source of food. But the nature of his death remained a mystery. With no clues and no firm leads, the investigation recorded cause of death as hypothermia.
The theory was that he just went up there, even just by chance, or maybe he took the wrong way, and then he died of exhaustion and because of the cold weather and so on.
OTZI froze at 11,000 feet, nearly 4,000 meters, on a desolate icy ridge. But now, challenging that theory is archaeologist Dr. Francis Pryor, a specialist in Neolithic life. We may never know his real name, but archaeologists call him Krogan Man, because he was found here, under the shadow of a place called Krogan Hill, located in central Ireland. It's a potential clue in figuring out who he was, because Krogan Hill was once the center of an ancient Irish kingdom.
When I came along to view the bog body down here in the bog, one immediately saw Krogan Hill, and one immediately knew the significance of this hill. This is the inauguration hill of the kings of this region.
During the Iron Age, Ireland was divided into hundreds of kingdoms, each ruled by a different king, crowned in sacred spaces or on hills like this one. What role did Krogan Man play in this ancient kingdom?
When we look closer at the hands of this individual, we can see that his fingernails are really very well trimmed, they're manicured, and they're clean. There's no way that this person has been working in the fields doing heavy manual work.
There were no scars or calluses on the hand. So this was a man who did not do manual labor. The other thing that was noted was that he had beautifully manicured fingernails. This indicates that this is a man of high social status.
So Krogan Man probably wasn't a warrior or a farmer. But there's another clue that might tell us who he was.
On his left arm, you can see he had an armlet. And it's an armlet made of plated leather with copper alloy mounts on it as well. The wearing of armlets, we believe, are indicative of high status. And in the Irish tradition, armlets are all associated with solar worship.
Archaeologists believe these hilltop monuments are strong evidence of sun and sky worship during the Iron Age. And the metal clips on Krogan Man's armlet could represent the sun and perhaps indicate he was a religious leader known as a druid.
They were very much a separate elite class. They kept themselves to themselves. It would take up to 20 years to learn to be a druid. So once you were chosen to become a druid, you'd be taken off at a young age and you would be taught the secrets. And then you would come back to society and be revered as this unknown person who has great power and links to the gods and to nature.
Tall, strong, high status, and possibly a religious leader. The next step for investigators is to piece together how he died.
Dr. Hutan Ashrafian is a leading surgeon. He specializes in cold cases from the ancient past. By carefully studying the family, Dr. Ashrafian's noticed distinct medical patterns that together could explain what killed King Tut.
The family are very interesting in that they all died relatively young. We know that Akhenaten died early. We know that Tutankhamun, his son, died early. We know that the great-grandfather died relatively early. They died at a sequentially younger age.
There's another familial pattern hidden here in plain sight.
So this is Tut's dad, we think.
So this is the statue of Akhenaten. Let's have a look at him. And you know, clearly this is not a male form.
It does look very feminine, wider hips.
This is meant to be a pharaoh, but he doesn't look like a normal man.
Several generations show the same body shape. And a recent analysis of Tut's loincloths found in his tomb reveal that his hips were also abnormally wide. Dr. Ashrafian believes some of King Tut's family suffered from gynecomastia, causing men to develop feminine features such as breasts and rounded hips. Our search for a genetic culprit is narrowing. Tut's mother, the younger lady, she's been laid to rest here, back in Cairo, in the treasure trove that is the Egyptian Museum. Here, just a few feet away, are the remains of Akhenaten, Tut's father. When Albert compared his genetic profile with that of the younger lady's, he discovered something shocking.
It's not only that this is the father and this is the mother of King Tut. It turned out that they are brother and sister, which was a big surprise for us.
So Tut's mother and father, so their mother and father, they were also brother and sister. So Tut was a product of incest.
A lot of incest happened. They didn't like to get royal and non-royal blood mixed, so they tried to keep it within the royal family.
So it's official. Comprehensive genetic profiling has proved that Tut's parents were brother and sister. Tutankhamun was born out of incest.
Just north of Inverness, a team of experts are carefully making their way down a 35-metre-high cliff to one of the most mystic archaeological sites in Britain, Cowsey. A steep descent, slippery rocks and high tides make this a treacherous place. It can only be accessed safely by highly trained archaeologists led by site co-director Lindsay Buster.
We're cut off now for about 4 hours, either side of high tide.
It's a major effort to get here safely. But 3,000 years ago, when health and safety laws were a bit more lax, the evidence suggests that Bronze Age people made this hazardous journey time and time again, carrying the bodies of their dead.
For prehistoric people to make the effort and to make the journey would have been really arduous and quite a difficult thing to do.
Lindsay thinks they did it because to them there was something about this place that gave it mystical, perhaps even magical properties.
When archaeologists first started excavating in here, the floor was strewn with human bones.
These bones were unique, unlike anything found in Britain before.
These are pictures of hand bones, and what you can see here is soft tissue. It's ligaments, and the same on this one here. That little bit there, that's soft tissue.
It may only be scraps, but don't be fooled. This is preserved human flesh, dating to the Bronze Age.
It's not something that we expect when we're excavating a site that's 3,000 years old. That's a really significant find.
It's possible that this bone was once part of an entire fully fleshed corpse. a body preserved by the unique conditions at OTZI. But there's no way to be certain.
We have evidence of fires being lit within the cave. At the same time, presumably, as bodies are being laid out here. The smoke could actually probably have helped to preserve bodies and body parts.
Bodies preserved by smoking and salting. It sounds a lot like mummification. But did people come here deliberately to make mummies? Lindsay suspects they did.
I think once bodies began to be brought into the cave and were behaving in ways that they didn't normally do on above-ground sites, those characteristics were probably well noted and became a factor in people coming back again and again over centuries to deposit their dead.
The mummy was uncovered in the Andean mountains of South America, on the lonely, snow-capped peak of the world's tallest active volcano, Mount Uyayaco. The year was 1999, and a high-altitude archaeological excavation was underway. Leading the team was explorer and anthropologist Dr. Johann Reinhardt.
All of a sudden I heard this guy cry out, "Mummy!"
They had discovered the highest tomb on Earth.
I went, holy smoke, we're at 22,000 feet. When she first came out of the ground, she was completely wrapped up. We couldn't see any part of her body, but the textiles were just outstanding, and they were so well preserved.
But the biggest surprise came when they removed her wrappings.
We're taking off the cloth of the girl. We had to talk, we had to communicate, do this, do that. It was in hushed voices. It was as if we were afraid at some level that we might wake this mummy up because she seemed just so alive. But nothing had the impact of when we uncovered her hands. Probably one of the most powerful experiences I've had in my life because those hands were perfect. We realized that this has got to be, if not the best preserved mummy in the world, we don't know of any other better.
And preserved along with her a spectacular collection of artifacts, ceramics, figurines, and textiles.
Everything seemed totally untouched. It was perfectly preserved. Nothing, not a feather had shrunk, not a color had faded, the archaeologist's dream.
Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to bury this girl in an extraordinary place. Now a team of investigators will attempt to decipher these objects, examine her body, and unravel the mysteries of this mummy. The first question, when did she die? The items in her tomb reveal the remarkable truth. They may look brand new, but archaeologists date them to over 500 years ago. Remnants of a legendary civilization, the Inca.
The statues that were with her, the ceramics that were with her, everything was from the Inca Empire.
This girl is a human link to the great empire that dominated South America in the 15th century. Famous for building Machu Picchu, the Inca are cloaked in mystery. Wiped out by Spanish conquest, they left no written language. So this girl is a rare and valuable glimpse into a lost civilization. Today she is conserved under the watchful eye of Gabriella Ricagno Browning.
For me, the maiden is not only a scientific object. She is a young woman that I love. I think that one of my missions in life is to take care of her.
Affectionately known as the Maiden, this mummy attracts visitors from all over the world. But some are not prepared for what they see.
When people here meet the Maiden, sometimes they get very shocked. They cry or they get sad because it's difficult to understand the death of this maiden, of this girl.
An Inca girl, buried 500 years ago on top of a volcano. Her corpse is strange. Seated and slumped, she looks like she slept to her death.
What is the real story of Tut's tomb? And can new clues help reveal its ultimate secrets? In a quest to find answers, Chris Naunton has traveled to the Valley of the Kings, where Carter made his original spectacular discovery. Inside the tomb, he notes something striking about the design.
So, one of the first things you notice when you enter this tomb, you come down the descending passageway and you need to take a right turn. And this is quite unusual for 18th dynasty tombs because in most cases what you would expect of a pharaoh's tomb would be a left-hand turn.
In ancient Egypt, the left was a symbol of masculinity. It was so important that the entrance to every king's tomb from Tut's dynasty involves an immediate turn to the left. The only other right-hand turn is in the tomb of Hatshepsut, a female pharaoh.
So the question then is, if in the case of the tomb of Hatshepsut, a right turn means the tomb of a female pharaoh, should we be expecting here not the burial of a male king, Tutankhamun, but a female pharaoh instead?
It appears King Tut's tomb was probably built not for a man, but for a woman. The female clues do not end there. Dr. Yasmin El-Shazly sees something intriguing about them.
If you look carefully at the faces on the stoppers of these canopic jars,
you'll notice that the portrait is quite different from that of Tutankhamun.
They look more feminine.
Experts agree that the heads on Tut's canopic jars have features that are more like a woman than a man. And remarkably, experts are even finding female features on the most famous piece of Tut's treasure, his death mask. Normally, a king's mask would all be made out of the same materials. But Tut's mask is different. El-Shazly reveals why.
The face is originally separate from the headdress, and they were welded together. So there are two different pieces.
There is a further clue on the ears of the mask's headdress.
The earlobes are very interesting because the ears were originally perforated. In three-dimensional art, men did not normally represent themselves with perforated ears. It suggests that the face itself did not originally belong to the rest of the headdress and that the headdress belonged to a woman.
The pierced ears indicate that Tut's iconic headdress may originally have been made for a woman, as were many other objects in Tut's tomb. The enduring question has been, who was she?
In the late 19th century, early 20th century, all the way up to the 50s, sideshows were very popular. I remember as a kid going into the sideshows, and they were always kind of interesting. You know, the two-headed calf and the 13-toed goat or whatever it might be. And perhaps there'd be a mummy, and that would really be a draw. Mummies have been a curiosity for we humans for as long as we knew they were around. If you had a real Egyptian mummy, you had a sideshow. If you didn't, you could get some embalmed individual.
Ron believes Sylvester was embalmed professionally and put on display. But a sideshow operator then acquired the body and took it on the road to make some cash.
But if he goes on the road, he has to have a great story. It can't be just, you know, a college professor, because who would come see them? So it has to have this story. He's a card thief. And he was shot in the stomach and died in the desert sand. Ooh, I want to go see that.
People are going to come into the sideshow, put their quarter down, and then touch a gunfighter. Wow, that's pretty incredible for a quarter.
Few tales tap into the American psyche better than that of a gunfighter in the Old West.
When we look at the number of television shows, popular movies right well into the 21st century that deal with this subject, the number of romantic novels, it almost is the backdrop to everything we are. This is our identity as Americans, regardless of where we live. In some way, we all have that little bit of cowboy in us.
In Sylvester's own lifetime, that Old West identity was already fading, to be replaced by industrialization and the growth of large cities. Opportunists like Buffalo Bill created an industry commercializing the cowboy myth. And legends like Sylvester have been a massive moneymaker ever since.
He is part of the reason we see the West as the gunslinging, lawless place where Doc Holliday's shooting people up everywhere, because that's the story we gave Sylvester. Whether it's the true story or not, didn't matter. What mattered is, how do you get people in the sideshow? He was a gunslinger. He was shot right here, and he died a terrible death in the Old West, and that's how they sold him. And he became the mythology of the good old days in the Old West.
But can the team uncover evidence proving the sideshow theory? It all comes back to the hole in Sylvester's belly.
This is supposedly where he was shot. A bullet went in there. But when Ron and I looked at it, it looked too circular. So now when we put the endoscope in, we see that there's this spiral pattern.
All right, we're inside.
Oh, Ron.
You can see the spirals.
There are spirals.
Okay.
What could have caused that spiral pattern? A drill, a manual drill. We actually drilled a hole through wood with this, went with the endoscope, and we saw almost exactly the same spiral pattern in the wood. Let's see if it fits. And I can't just push it in. I've got to kind of screw it in, because that's how it would have gone in, and it fits perfect. Exact fit. So Ron and I have looked at 7 sideshow mummies. All of them have fantastic stories, but you got to make the story believable. And if you take that 1/4 inch or 6 millimeter drill, you poke the hole, you put a little red paint there, someone's going to come and look at this guy for a quarter.
British Egyptologist Dr. Chris Naunton is on the trail of an ancient Egyptian mystery.
What I can see is a shaft, a deep shaft cut directly into the rock. It goes down about 20 meters, about 60 feet, and it leads to a network of tunnels. And these extend for about 100 meters, 300 feet, something like that. And in the walls of these tunnels, there are niches, kind of side chambers.
The discovery is known today as the Royal Cache. Among the mummies are 10 pharaohs, including some of the greatest names of ancient Egypt. But alongside legendary kings like Ramesses the Great and Seti I is a little-known pharaoh whose reign is shrouded in mystery. Sekenenre-Tao.
Sekenenre isn't as famous as some of his successors like Ramesses the Great or Seti I, but the fact that he was buried alongside those pharaohs suggests that for the ancient Egyptians, he was every bit a part of that line of great kings.
Who is this mystery pharaoh buried among the greats? The first clue, an inscription on the lid of his coffin. Sekenenre the Brave. Why the brave? Hidden inside the coffin was a mummy the likes of which had never been seen before.
When we look at the front of his face, it certainly doesn't look normal. It's very distorted. You may just be able to see the ends of the nose there, but the whole of the nose, the eye on the right, The bridge of the nose, the eye on the left are all very distorted.
Seqenenre is unique. He's the only mummified pharaoh ever found with such violent injuries. Dr. Richard Shepherd is a world-renowned forensic pathologist. His specialty? The investigation of suspicious deaths.
These are the two wounds to the right side of Seqenenre's head. This is a wound where actually a piece of the skull has been forced in. It's been smashed into his brain underneath this, producing this large crater-like effect. This wound has a slightly different appearance, partly because I think a bit of the bone has broken off, possibly as the weapon was removed. It's flipped a piece of the outer part of the skull off. But this too has actually cut through. It's punched into the skull.
A mutilated mummy with an heroic epitaph. Understanding how he died is the key to unlocking the secrets of his life. Dr. Shepherd turns to the only full autopsy ever performed on the body. It was carried out 100 years ago by anatomist Elliot Smith. His conclusions? Seqenenre died from axe wounds received in battle. Dr. Shepherd is taking a closer look at Smith's report.
Elliot Smith says axe in his report, and I'd back it up forensically from our knowledge now. When I look at these two injuries, what I can say is that they are both lethal wounds, and you'd probably only need one of them to cause death, but the two together are a certain cause of death.
The experts agree on the cause of death. Fatal axe blows to the head. But did he receive these wounds on the battlefield? And if so, why risk a pharaoh's life on the front line?
At the British Museum in London, I've been given special permission to visit after dark with archaeologist Eamon Kelly. Let's hope nothing comes alive. We're bypassing the museum's famous Egyptian mummies to visit something altogether stranger, and to be honest, less attractive. The slightly squished, rather tanned body of a man who died around 2,000 years ago. Not in Egypt, but just off the M6 near Wilmslow in Cheshire.
So why is he in this state?
Well, he was found in a bog in the northwest of England, LINDOW Moss. He was found in the course of peat cutting operations.
The peat cutting machine sliced the man's body in two, but what remains is extraordinary. He died around 2,000 years ago, but I can still see his toenails, hair follicles, even the stubble on his chin. Now this is what I call a mummy. He even has a name, LINDOW Man, after LINDOW Moss, the bog where he was found.
This is fantastically preserved, considering how long, we're talking 2,000 years. What is it about the bog that preserves human flesh?
What preserved the bodies, essentially, is the sphagnum moss, which is in the bog. It produces a chemical which converts human flesh and skin to leather.
Okay.
And you can see...
He's got a leathery quality to his skin now.
You have a leathery quality.
Yeah.
This man is one of hundreds of preserved ancient bodies found in bogs across northern Europe. Many of them died violent deaths, including the man in front of me.
He was certainly struck on the head, which was probably the first of the injuries, which would have knocked him unconscious. It didn't kill him outright.
Right.
There is a garrote around his neck, and his neck has been broken.
Right. So he's been banged on the head and garroted. That's enough to kill him, I suppose, either
That
of those
certainly
eventually.
would have killed him, yeah.
Eamon believes these men and women were ritually killed as sacrifices to the gods. And that could explain why their bodies were put in bogs.
The interesting thing is that Lindow Moss is on a very important tribal boundary.
All right.
It's still a parish boundary
Yes.
to this day. And the boundary areas were where these ritual killings took place because boundaries, and particularly boundary bogs, provided access to the other world. So a ritual performed at such a location would be deemed to be more effective.
Bound by the ropes cut into his arms, his final walk to the place of execution would have been agonizing.
AKHENATEN was a young man. He would have almost certainly have had children. He would have had a clear view of the hill and of the inauguration mound on which he was made king. So one would wonder what sort of reflections would have passed through his mind at that last moment. It must have been a very frightening experience. They knew that they were going to face a very violent death. The body was found right in the middle of that bog. And there he was put to death. And he was beheaded.
After 24 centuries, the secrets of this mummy's death have come to light. He was a man brutally killed by others, not a fallen soldier in battle, or the victim of random violence. This man died for his people.
This man was a former king who failed in his kingship, and that his death is the natural consequence of that. He's being killed so that he can be replaced by a new, young, vigorous, successful king who will be married to the same cruel goddess as this man was. So, such was life in ancient Ireland.
The investigation surrounding Sylvester the Mummy has once again turned to ballistics.
Why don't we take a look? I'd love to see the backside and see if we have complete penetration all the way around.
George and Christopher believe their shotgun test
It looks to me like they all went through. I can see.
shows a pattern matching the pellets embedded in Sylvester's face.
Well, I have the X-ray pictures here. Oh, look at that. Look at the similarities. You just even pick any one random number of these.
No, you're absolutely right. The spread that we're seeing on the board is really just about right. And if you lay that out, it's just a little bigger than our hand.
Yeah.
The spread of pellets shows that the shooter was at least 20 paces away, probably outdoors, and it even suggests the gun wasn't directly pointed at Sylvester. not really evidence of attempted murder.
And I think with all these small holes, the fact is we're talking about debilitating someone,
right?
But you're not really talking about the ability to kill at this range.
That's true.
Whoever took this to Sylvester's face was not looking to kill him. This was not Doc Holliday going out to blow somebody's head off. This could very well be a hunting accident. It happened recently with Dick Cheney, where he shot his friend accidentally while on a hunting trip. He brought the gun up, he fired too quickly at something that was taking off, and he hit the man in the side of the face. This is not an uncommon occurrence in a place where people went out hunting together in many instances, and you may have had someone, you know, who simply wasn't careful.
Mountain rescue Dr. Marcelo Parada has seen this sort of death before, in the victims of avalanches.
They were buried for quite a long time, 4 or 5 hours, and when we dug them out, they were dead, hypothermic, and they had vomit around their mouth.
The maiden does have vomit on her lips. So was this her terrible fate? Did priests bury her alive as an offering to the gods?
When someone's buried alive, there's always that struggle to escape from the material that's pinning them down. So there's evidence of movements of the hands, sometimes with damage to the nails and the fingertips. Looking at the maiden, I don't see any evidence at all to suggest that she was buried alive.
Johann Reinhardt was one of the first people to lay eyes on her tomb after it was sealed 500 years earlier.
There's no sense of struggle in the tomb itself. All the items that are around her look like they haven't been disturbed. She herself looks like she hasn't been terribly disturbed. Her hands one over the other. If somebody's struggling, would you have their hands like this? Doesn't seem very likely.
Looking back at his discovery now, Johann believes that the murder weapon may have been staring him in the face. One of the first things he had to remove from her body was a thick woolen cloth, pulled over her entire head and knotted tightly at the back.
Once you have cloths wrapped around your head and your mouth at 22,000 feet, you're out of breath immediately. You know, I mean, it just...
She could have asphyxiated if she was highly intoxicated with alcohol.
Marcelo agrees that it wouldn't have taken much to smother the maiden, given her condition.
There is a point where intoxicated people, their brain is so compromised, they won't even struggle.
Perhaps the alcohol was administered to help ease her journey out of this world and into the next.
In a situation of low oxygen, when the person is at altitude, incapacitated through drugs or alcohol, it's likely they're going to succumb far more quickly than were they down at sea level.
Having weighed up all the evidence, Dr. Shepherd delivers his final verdict.
Having considered all of the facts, I think suffocation is a very likely cause of death for the maiden.
For 500 years, the Inca maiden has guarded the secrets of how she died. Now, the truth is revealed. A gentle suffocation to send her to the gods.
I don't think she suffered. She wasn't aware of that. That's what alcohol does. You're kind of isolated from the environment.
We think that the maiden died peacefully. In this case, there are no presence of violence. You can see in her face that she rests in peace.
When the Inca offered this child to the gods, they believed she would live forever, eternally young, immortalized in her glorious sacrifice. That is what Gabriella wants to believe too.
I prefer to think as her as a goddess, and that she's happy in some way. Traumatic happiness, but happiness at least. The alternative is too sad.
Francis Pryor shifts the direction of his investigation. He thinks OTZI's slaughter may have more to do with the location of the body than the crime scene itself. OTZI was found in a place where the landscape suddenly changes. These areas are known as liminal zones and are associated throughout history with human sacrifice.
He was found in a liminal zone. He was above the tree line, in the snow, and that's where we do find sacrificial victims.
From the dark pools of ancient peat bogs to frozen mountains at the heart of mighty empires, humans of all ages and social rank have been chosen as the ultimate sacrifice. Valuable offerings to wrathful gods. Did OTZI meet a similar end and become a human sacrifice on an icy glacier? Francis Pryor believes there is one more piece of vital evidence which will support his sacrificial theory. Near the bow, lying on a stone slab, was one of the most precious archaeological finds ever made: OTZI's copper axe.
The radiocarbon dates for OTZI came through, and there could be absolutely no arguing with them. This axe was 3300 BC, which shoved the appearance of copper back a full half millennium.
OTZI's copper axe rewrites the history books, pushing the Copper Age back 500 years. Making this axe required enormous skill.
In order to make copper, you've got to get temperatures in excess of 1000 degrees centigrade. It's all about the control of heat. That is the key thing.
Francis Pryor believes the axe is another clue supporting his idea that OTZI was a victim of ritual sacrifice. Smelting and casting copper over 5,000 years ago was seen as almost magical, a rare skill. This Neolithic axe was a diamond jewel of its day. Was it, like OTZI, a sacrificial gift to the gods?
Had that been a vendetta, had that been a robbery, had that been a casual killing, you would not walk off and leave something as incredibly valuable as a copper axe lying there.
Ordinarily, there was a very clearly articulated process for burying the king and making sure that everything was perfect.
It appears that this was not the case for Tut.
One of the interesting features of these walls and the paintings is these strange sort of spotty marks. These black patches that you see all around the walls are in fact organic. They are mold.
This mold appears nowhere else in the Valley of the Kings. At first, conservation experts worried that in this otherwise dry environment, the mold was being caused by the breath and sweat of countless tourists. But a study of Howard Carter's original photographs revealed that this could not be the case. And it gives experts an insight into events over 3,000 years ago, to the precise time of young Tut's burial. It seems that his tomb was sealed before the paint on the walls had dried.
The supposition is that the walls had some residual humidity from the painting that was still there when the tomb was sealed.
In this case, if the paint was still wet, you very much have this sense that everything was done as quickly as possible.
conservation expert Adam Lowe and his team recently took high-resolution photographs of the burial chamber's paintings. At a resolution of up to 100 microns, they reveal details as small as the tip of a human hair, including the individual brushstrokes of ancient craftsmen. Seen close up, the brushstrokes do seem to have been painted in a hurry.
You can see here there are clearly traces of brush marks that are clearly done like this. So they're not done like this. The application of the ochre color is done very fast with bigger brushes. I mean, that's a very fast mark. That's a... my estimate is that it wouldn't have taken a team of skilled painters much over a week to paint Tutankhamun's tomb.
Painting a king's tomb normally took years of work. So why was Tut's tomb prepared in such a rush? Egyptian kings normally had their tombs built and decorated long before they died. But Tut's mummy reveals he died unexpectedly, around the age of just 19. According to ancient tradition, only 70 days can elapse between the moment of the king's death and the sealing of his tomb.
For almost a century, Tutankhamun's dazzling treasures displayed in the Cairo Museum have told the story of the boy king's short life. But now, as all of his 5,000 treasures are being brought together at the new Grand Egyptian Museum, another far stranger tale is emerging. Not of Tutankhamun's life, but of his supernatural experiences after death.
The ancient Egyptians weren't obsessed with death. They were obsessed with living, and they wanted to live the best life they could, and they wanted that to continue if they could after death.
Egyptologists believe this is why Tutankhamun's tomb was crammed full of everything from golden statues to simple loincloths. His tomb was a colossal supernatural suitcase, packed with everything he'd need to help him navigate the afterlife and live there forever. But what did Tutankhamun expect to find when or if he got there? For Egyptologist Salima Ikram, the answer lies in some of the smallest items discovered in his tomb.
You needed to eat in the afterlife, and Tutankhamun was a teenage boy, so clearly he wanted to be well supplied. And so he had bread, he had wine, he had pomegranates, little green onions, and garlic. So he could flavor his food or munch on the green onion. And there are dates. There are piles of dates here. But what's really amazing about Tutankhamun's dates is that they were pitted, so he wouldn't have to chew around and throw out the pit. So these are really posh dates for the afterlife.
And these were just the appetizers. For the entree, Tutankhamun could choose from an all-you-can-eat buffet of Egypt's finest meats.
He had ribs, he had large joints of meat coming from the foreleg of cattle. And there are all these boxes of mummified poultry. Often the containers are made in the shape of what they are supposed to contain.
It was a feast fit for a pharaoh, pre-cooked, pre-packed, and preserved for eternity.
It doesn't look like much now, or indeed anything at all, to be honest, unless you're a fan of root vegetables. But in 2009, on this very spot, Martin excavated what could be one of the strangest pieces of evidence of mummification in the whole country.
Who or what was buried in this mound?
This is an adolescent female, and when the bones were being cleaned after we'd taken them out of the grave, there's some very unusual aspects of them.
So what were these unusual aspects? And what have they got to do with mummification? Because let's face it, she looks nothing like a mummy. Rather disturbingly, Martin tells me the girl's skeleton is stored back at his house. Suddenly, the turnip field doesn't sound so bad. Fortunately, it's not in his living room, but in a museum he's set up for the things found around the farm.
Oh, wow. Oh, it's a proper... Well, it's a museum, as you said.
There are thousands of flints, the skulls of ancient giant cows, and all manner of pots, teeth, and ancient bits and bobs.
And here's another skeleton.
Yeah.
You've got more dead bodies than a serial killer.
But this is the body I'm interested in, the teenage girl found in the turnip field. And here's why.
This is where we discovered the drill hole here. This femur that you can see.
The end of her leg bones have holes in them. Martin believes these were man-made, gouged out using razor-sharp flint tools.
Yeah, you can see very clear.
Fortunately, after her death.
We did some scanning electron microscope work on here and CAT scanning, and you could see the actual way it had been drilled with a tool in this kind of motion.
Right.
There are drilled holes in both her legs and her left arm. Martin suspects that as the girl's body started to decompose, someone tried to stop it falling apart, stringing it together like a kind of human puppet.
So you've got a hole in that end of that bone, and there's another hole in that bone there.
Yes, that's right.
Which suggests you could link the two together.
Presumably, you either use a little, a bone point or a stick, or possibly you might even use some kind of sinew as a form of string. That kind of thing, obviously, we're never going to be able to say for sure, but it's tempting to think that that is the kind of thing they were doing.
Yeah, I can hear a dog barking in the background. Maybe all this talk of bones has excited the canine population.
Indeed.
Yeah.
The rover is barking up the wrong tree because there isn't a scrap of meat left on these bones. And that makes it hard to know if this macabre marionette was once a proper mummy. But it suggests, at the very least, rudimentary efforts to preserve a dead body. Because presumably the point of all this drilling was to keep the corpse intact.